In the rigid hierarchy of military life, assumptions can be deadly. What happens when seasoned officers mistake quiet confidence for weakness? When they see a young woman in uniform and assume she doesn't belong? Sometimes, the very person they choose to target holds more power than they could ever imagine. This is the story of Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen, a brilliant naval strategist who walked onto Coronado Naval Base carrying secrets that would shake the foundation of everything her colleagues thought they knew about leadership, respect, and the true meaning of command authority. Some lessons in humility come from the most unexpected teachers. The California sun beat down mercilessly on the tarmac of Naval Base Coronado as Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen stepped out of the black sedan. Her crisp white uniform was already beginning to show signs of the heat, but her posture remained perfectly straight, her expression calm and collected. At 28, she had learned to school her features into a mask of professional composure, a skill that had served her well throughout her meteoric rise through the ranks. The driver, a young seaman, hurried around to retrieve her single duffel bag from the trunk. Sarah thanked him with a brief nod and surveyed her new home for the next 18 months. Coronado Naval Base sprawled before her like a small city, its buildings gleaming white against the azure backdrop of San Diego Bay. Helicopters thundered overhead in training exercises, their rotors beating a familiar rhythm that reminded her of her previous deployment. "Ma'am, would you like me to escort you to the administration building?" the seaman asked, his voice barely audible over the aircraft noise. "Thank you, but I can find my way," Sarah replied, shouldering her bag. She had studied the base layout extensively during her flight from Norfolk. Preparation had always been her strength, a trait that had earned her both commendation and, she suspected, some resentment from her peers. As she walked across the parade ground toward the towering administration complex, Sarah couldn't help but notice the curious glances from passing personnel. Some were merely the natural interest anyone would show a new arrival, but others carried a different quality. She had grown accustomed to being one of the few women in many of her previous assignments, but Coronado seemed particularly male-dominated, even by Navy standards. The lobby of the administration building was a testament to naval tradition, with photographs of distinguished officers lining the walls and display cases filled with ceremonial artifacts. Behind the reception desk sat a petty officer whose name tag read Morrison. He looked up as Sarah approached, his expression shifting from boredom to mild interest. "Lieutenant Commander Chen reporting for duty," Sarah said, presenting her orders with practiced efficiency. Morrison's eyes flicked over the documents, then back to her face. "Welcome to Coronado, ma'am. You're assigned to Strategic Operations, Building 7. Commander Rodriguez is expecting you at 1400 hours. "Thank you, Petty Officer Morrison. Could you direct me to temporary quarters?" "Building 12, Room 247. Here's your key and base access card." Morrison slid the items across the counter, his demeanor remaining professionally neutral, though Sarah caught something in his expression she couldn't quite identify. The walk to her temporary quarters took her past several training areas where she observed various exercises in progress. Groups of Navy SEALs were conducting physical training on the beach, their synchronized movements impressive even from a distance. Near the obstacle course, she noticed a cluster of officers watching the proceedings, their casual conversation carrying on the warm breeze. "New meat," she heard one of them say, though she couldn't tell if they were referring to the trainees or something else entirely. Building 12 was a standard military dormitory, functional but comfortable. Sarah's room was small but adequate, with a single bed, desk, and wardrobe that would serve her needs perfectly well. She unpacked efficiently, hanging her uniforms with military precision and arranging her personal items in the drawer space provided. Among her few personal effects was a framed photograph of her parents at their restaurant in San Francisco's Chinatown, their proud smiles reminding her of how far she had come from that bustling kitchen where she had first learned the value of hard work and determination. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. She opened it to find a tall, athletic woman in lieutenant's stripes, her red hair pulled back in a regulation bun. "Lieutenant Commander Chen? I'm Lieutenant Jessica Martinez from Strategic Operations. Commander Rodriguez asked me to check on you before this afternoon's meeting." "Please, come in," Sarah said, stepping aside. "I appreciate you taking the time." Martinez entered and glanced around the Spartan room. "Not much to look at, but it's clean and quiet. How was your flight from Norfolk?" "Uneventful, which is how I prefer my travel." Sarah gestured toward the room's single chair while she remained standing. "What can you tell me about strategic operations here?" "We're a small but vital department. 12 officers, about 30 enlisted personnel. We handle logistics coordination for special operations, intelligence analysis, and strategic planning for the Pacific Theater. Martinez paused, studying Sarah's face carefully. Commander Rodriguez is good people, but he's got some strong personalities to manage in the department. There was something in Martinez's tone that suggested more than she was saying directly. Sarah had learned to read between the lines in military conversations, where criticism was often couched in diplomatic language. "I appreciate the heads up," Sarah said. "Any particular challenges I should be aware of?" Martinez hesitated for a moment, then seemed to make a decision. "Look, ma'am, I'll be straight with you. There are some officers here who have pretty traditional views about women in leadership positions. Nothing that violates regulations, understand, but they can make life complicated if they want to." "I see. Anyone specific I should know about?" "Commander Jack Harrison is the deputy director. He's been here 6 years and has a lot of influence with the senior staff. He's competent at his job, but he tends to be skeptical of officers who haven't come up through what he considers traditional channels." Martinez's diplomatic phrasing couldn't entirely mask her warning. Sarah nodded thoughtfully. She had encountered Harrison's type before, career officers who viewed rapid advancement with suspicion, particularly when it involved anyone who didn't fit their narrow definition of military leadership. She had learned to navigate such personalities carefully, letting her work speak for itself while avoiding unnecessary confrontation. "What about the enlisted personnel?" Sarah asked. "Mixed bag, like anywhere else. Most are professional and competent. Chief Petty Officer Thompson runs the operations center and knows more about Pacific Theater logistics than anyone else on the base. If you need something done, he's your go-to person." A bell chimed somewhere in the building, marking the half hour. Martinez checked her watch and stood. "I should let you get ready for your meeting. Commander Rodriguez's office is on the second floor of Building 7. The reception area will direct you from there." After Martinez left, Sarah spent a few minutes reviewing her personnel file and the briefing materials she had been given about her new assignment. Her official role was Strategic Operations Analyst, a position that would involve coordinating between various departments and providing analytical support for mission planning. It was exactly the kind of role that played to her strengths in systems thinking and organizational analysis. What the personnel file didn't mention, and what only a handful of people in the entire Navy knew, was her real purpose at Coronado. 3 months earlier, she had been personally selected by Admiral Catherine Morrison, Chief of Naval Operations, for a highly classified assessment project. Her true mission was to evaluate the effectiveness of Special Operations command structures and identify potential improvements in interdepartmental coordination. It was the kind of assignment that could make or break a career, depending on what she found and how diplomatically she handled her recommendations. The irony was not lost on her that she would be observing and evaluating the very officers who would likely view her as an outsider trying to prove herself worthy of their respect. If they only knew that her opinions would eventually reach the highest levels of Navy leadership, their behavior might be considerably different. Sarah changed into a fresh uniform and made her way to Building 7. The Strategic Operations Complex was newer than most of the base facilities, its modern design reflecting the high-tech nature of contemporary military planning. The lobby was bustling with activity, officers and enlisted personnel moving with the purposeful energy of an operational center. The reception area directed her to the second floor, where she found Commander Rodriguez's office behind a door marked with his name and title. She knocked and heard a voice call for her to enter. Commander Miguel Rodriguez was a compact man in his mid-40s, his dark hair showing distinguished streaks of gray at the temples. He rose from behind his desk as she entered, extending his hand with a genuine smile. "Lieutenant Commander Chen, welcome to Coronado. Please, have a seat." He gestured toward a pair of chairs arranged in front of his desk. "How are you settling in?" "Very well, sir. The facilities are impressive, and Lieutenant Martinez was helpful in getting me oriented." "Good, good. Martinez is one of our best junior officers. I'm sure she filled you in on the basics of our operation here." Rodriguez returned to his chair and opened a folder on his desk. "I've reviewed your file, and I have to say, your credentials are outstanding. MIT for undergraduate work, the Naval War College, and your performance evaluations are consistently exceptional." "Thank you, sir. I'm looking forward to contributing to the mission here." Excellent attitude. Rodriguez leaned forward slightly. I want to be direct with you about something. Your assignment here is somewhat unusual. Most officers in strategic operations have come up through surface warfare or aviation communities. Your background in intelligence analysis and strategic planning is exactly what we need, but it may take some time for everyone to appreciate what you bring to the table. Sarah recognized the careful phrasing. Rodriguez was warning her, just as Martinez had, that she might face resistance from some quarters. I understand, sir. I'm prepared to prove myself through my work. I have no doubt you will. Now, let me brief you on your specific responsibilities. Rodriguez pulled out a thick manila folder. You'll be heading up a new initiative to improve coordination between our strategic planning and the various special operations units based here. SEALs, Marine Recon, Air Force Special Operations, even some classified units I can't discuss in detail. This was interesting. Sarah had expected a more traditional analytical role, but coordination between special operations units was exactly the kind of challenge that excited her. These were elite units with strong traditions and fierce independence, not naturally inclined to accept direction from outside their established hierarchies. What kind of coordination problems have you identified? She asked. Resource conflicts, intelligence sharing gaps, overlapping mission parameters that sometimes lead to units working at cross purposes. Nothing catastrophic, but inefficiencies that could be costly in a real operational environment. Rodriguez handed her the folder. Your job is to analyze current procedures, identify bottlenecks and conflicts, then develop recommendations for improvement. Sarah accepted the folder, feeling its weight. This was exactly the kind of work she had trained for, the intersection of strategic thinking and practical implementation that had driven her throughout her career. What's my timeline for initial assessment? 6 weeks for preliminary findings, 3 months for detailed recommendations. You'll be working closely with representatives from each unit, which means you'll need to build relationships quickly with some very alpha personalities. As if summoned by his words, there was a knock at the door. Rodriguez called for them to enter, and the door opened to admit a tall, broad-shouldered commander whose bearing immediately identified him as someone accustomed to authority. Ah, Harrison, perfect timing. I'd like you to meet Lieutenant Commander Chen, our new strategic operations analyst. Commander Jack Harrison stepped forward, his pale blue eyes taking in Sarah with an expression that managed to be both politely professional and subtly dismissive. He was perhaps 45, with the kind of weathered features that spoke of years in challenging environments. His handshake was firm but brief. Welcome aboard, Lieutenant Commander. Rodriguez tells me you'll be looking at our coordination procedures. That's right, sir. I'm looking forward to learning about current operations and identifying areas for potential improvement. Harrison's smile didn't reach his eyes. Improvement is always welcome, of course. Though I should mention that our current procedures have been refined over many years of actual operational experience. Sometimes what looks inefficient on paper works quite well in practice. The message was clear: don't come in here thinking you can immediately improve on what we've spent years developing. Sarah had expected exactly this kind of response. Absolutely, sir. My approach will be to understand thoroughly how things work now before suggesting any changes. Operational experience is invaluable. Good to hear. Harrison's tone suggested he remained skeptical but was willing to give her the benefit of the doubt, at least initially. I'm sure Rodriguez has explained that coordination with special operations units requires a particular kind of understanding. These are elite warriors who've earned their positions through extraordinary dedication and sacrifice. There it was again, the subtle implication that she might not fully appreciate what she was dealing with. Sarah had encountered this attitude before, the assumption that because she hadn't come up through combat arms, she couldn't understand the warrior culture that dominated special operations. I have great respect for special operations personnel, Sarah replied evenly. My goal is to support their missions more effectively, not to interfere with proven methods. Rodriguez intervened before the conversation could develop further tension. Harrison, why don't you give Chen a tour of the operations center? She should see how our coordination works in practice. Of course. Harrison checked his watch. If you're ready, Lieutenant Commander, I can show you around now. Sarah stood and gathered her materials. Thank you both. I appreciate the orientation. As they left Rodriguez's office, Sarah found herself walking beside Harrison through corridors lined with maps and operational charts. The operations center was clearly the heart of the building, with multiple workstations monitoring various activities across the Pacific Theater. "This is our main coordination hub," Harrison explained, his tone now more professional than personal. "We track operations from Alaska to Australia, coordinating resources and intelligence for 12 different special operations units." The center was impressive, with large displays showing real-time information about naval movements, weather patterns, and operational status reports. Several officers and enlisted personnel moved between workstations, their actions suggesting well-practiced routine. "Chief Thompson," Harrison called to a senior petty officer manning one of the central consoles. "I'd like you to meet Lieutenant Commander Chin, our new strategic analyst." Chief Petty Officer Thompson turned from his console, revealing a compact, energetic man whose alert eyes suggested keen intelligence. His handshake was firm and welcoming. "Pleasure to meet you, ma'am. Welcome to the nerve center of Pacific Operations." "Thank you, Chief. This is an impressive setup. How long have you been running operations here?" 8 years, ma'am. Seen a lot of changes in that time, mostly for the better. Technology keeps improving, but the basics of coordination remain the same: clear communication, accurate information, and mutual respect between units. Sarah appreciated Thompson's direct manner. Senior petty officers like him were often the backbone of military operations, possessing institutional knowledge that formal training couldn't replicate. "What would you say are the biggest coordination challenges you face?" Thompson glanced quickly at Harrison before responding. "Resource allocation during overlapping operations, ma'am. When multiple units need the same assets at the same time, priorities aren't always clear. And intelligence sharing can be tricky when different units have different clearance levels." These were exactly the kinds of issues Sarah had expected to encounter. They were technical problems that could be solved with better procedures and clearer protocols, but implementing solutions would require buy-in from units that valued their independence. "Those sound like challenges we can address systematically," Sarah said. "I'd like to observe operations here regularly to understand the patterns better." "Of course, ma'am," Thompson replied. "We operate 24/7, so you're welcome anytime." Harrison led her through the rest of the center, pointing out various systems and explaining their functions. Despite his initial skepticism, he was thorough and professional in his explanations, providing useful context for understanding how coordination actually worked in practice. As they concluded the tour, Harrison paused near the center's main exit. "Lieutenant Commander, I want to be clear about something. The officers and enlisted personnel here take pride in their work and their units. They've earned their positions through performance under pressure. Any recommendations you develop should take that into account." "I understand completely, sir. My goal is to enhance effectiveness, not to disrupt proven relationships." Harrison nodded slowly. "Good. I hope you'll find our operations here meet the standards you're accustomed to." There was something in his phrasing that seemed to question what standards she might be accustomed to, but Sarah chose not to pursue it. She had gathered enough information for one afternoon, and she had plenty to think about regarding both her official assignment and her classified assessment mission. As she walked back to her quarters, Sarah reflected on her first day at Coronado. The challenges were exactly what she had expected: highly competent people who were suspicious of outsiders, especially outsiders who might suggest changes to their established methods. Harrison clearly saw her as someone who would need to prove herself worthy of their respect, and he wasn't alone in that assessment. What they didn't know was that Admiral Morrison had specifically chosen Sarah for this assignment because of her ability to navigate exactly these kinds of political and professional challenges. Her real test wouldn't be whether she could identify problems and solutions, it would be whether she could implement improvements without triggering the kind of resistance that could undermine the entire effort. Tomorrow she would begin her detailed analysis, starting with the most sensitive aspect of her mission, evaluating whether the current leadership structure was adequate for the complex demands of modern special operations coordination. It was work that would require all of her diplomatic skills, because the wrong conclusion presented in the wrong way could destroy careers and damage national security. As the sun set over San Diego Bay, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Sarah prepared for what she knew would be one of the most challenging assignments of her career. She had 18 months to prove herself to her new colleagues while secretly evaluating their performance for the highest levels of Navy leadership. The irony was perfect: they would be testing her while she was testing them, neither side fully aware of what the other was really measuring. The alarm on Sarah's phone buzzed at exactly 0500 hours, though she had been awake for 20 minutes already, her internal clock still adjusting to Pacific time. She had learned long ago that arriving early and staying late was essential for earning credibility in new assignments, especially when that credibility was already in question. The base was coming alive as she made her way to the officers' mess for breakfast. Early morning physical training was in full swing, with various units conducting their ritualistic preparation for the day ahead. The sound of synchronized chanting from SEAL teams echoed across the parade ground, their voices carrying the aggressive enthusiasm that marked elite units worldwide. The mess hall was perhaps half full, mostly early risers like herself who preferred to start the day before the rush. Sarah selected a simple breakfast of scrambled eggs, wheat toast, and coffee, then looked for a place to sit where she could observe without seeming to intrude on established social groups. She chose a table near the windows overlooking the bay, pulling out a folder to review while she ate. Her first week's schedule included meetings with representatives from 6 different special operations units, each session designed to understand their current coordination procedures and identify potential friction points. "Mind if we join you?" The voice belonged to Lieutenant Martinez, who was approaching with another officer Sarah didn't recognize. "Please," Sarah said, gesturing to the empty chairs. "I'd welcome the company." Martinez sat down across from her, followed by a heavy-set lieutenant commander whose name tag read Patterson. His handshake was firm and his demeanor friendly, a welcome contrast to some of the cooler reception she had received. "Tom Patterson, Logistics Coordination," he said. "Jessica tells me you're our new efficiency expert." "Strategic analyst," Sarah corrected gently. "My job is to understand how things work now before suggesting any changes." "Smart approach," Patterson said, attacking his breakfast with obvious hunger. "Too many new arrivals want to reorganize everything before they understand why things work the way they do." This was encouraging. Patterson seemed like someone who might become an ally, or at least a source of honest information about current operations. "What would you say are the biggest logistical challenges you face?" Sarah asked. Patterson glanced around to ensure they weren't being overheard, then leaned forward slightly. "Resource scheduling when multiple units have overlapping requirements. Last month we had 3 different operations requiring helicopter support at the same time, all classified at different levels, all claiming priority. How did you resolve it?" "Command decision by Rodriguez, but it created tension between the units. The SEAL team that got bumped wasn't happy, and they let everyone know it." Martinez nodded. "Inter-unit rivalry is real here. Everyone thinks their mission is most important, and they're usually right from their perspective." This was valuable information. Resource conflicts weren't just technical problems, they were political ones that required careful handling to avoid damaging morale and unit cohesion. "Are there formal protocols for priority determination?" Sarah asked. "On paper, yes," Patterson replied. "In practice, it often comes down to who has the most influence with senior leadership." As if summoned by their conversation, Commander Harrison appeared at their table, coffee cup in hand and expression carefully neutral. "Good morning," he said, his eyes taking in the group. "Lieutenant Commander Chen, settling in well?" "Very well, sir." Lieutenant Commander Patterson and Lieutenant Martinez have been helpful in explaining operational realities. Harrison's gaze shifted to Patterson, who suddenly seemed very interested in his breakfast. "Patterson knows our logistics challenges better than anyone. I'm sure he's giving you a realistic picture of what we deal with here." There was something in Harrison's tone that suggested he might not entirely approve of Patterson's candor with the new arrival. Sarah made a mental note to be careful about putting any of her new colleagues in awkward positions with their chain of command. "Everyone has been very professional and helpful," Sarah said carefully. "Good to hear." Harrison checked his watch. "Chen, when you have a moment today, I'd like to introduce you to Lieutenant Commander Burke from the SEAL team. He's requested a meeting to discuss coordination procedures from their perspective." This was interesting. Sarah had planned to arrange meetings with unit representatives herself, but apparently word was already spreading about her presence and purpose. "I'd appreciate that, sir. When would be convenient?" Burke suggested 0900 in conference room C. "I'll make the introduction, then leave you two to discuss specifics." After Harrison departed, Patterson exhaled slowly. "Word of advice," he said quietly. "Burke is good at his job, but he's got strong opinions about how things should work. He's also Harrison's favorite SEAL team commander. Martinez nodded agreement. Burke's team has the highest operational tempo on base. They're deployed constantly and they're very successful, which gives him considerable influence. What should I expect from him? Direct, blunt, probably skeptical of anything that sounds like bureaucracy, Patterson said. SEALs are results-oriented. If you can frame your analysis in terms of mission effectiveness, he'll listen. If it sounds like paperwork for its own sake, he'll dismiss you immediately. Sarah appreciated the warning. She had worked with special operations personnel before and understood their priorities. The key was demonstrating that improved coordination would enhance their capabilities rather than constrain them. After breakfast, she returned to her quarters to review what she knew about SEAL operations at Coronado. The intelligence was impressive. Team 7 conducted an average of 40 missions per year across the Pacific Theater, with a success rate that was classified but reportedly exceptional. Lieutenant Commander Michael Burke had led the team for 18 months and had a reputation for aggressive leadership and tactical innovation. At exactly 0900, Sarah arrived at conference room C to find Harrison waiting with a tall, lean officer whose bearing immediately identified him as someone accustomed to command in dangerous situations. Burke's handshake was brief but firm, his dark eyes assessing her with the kind of attention she recognized from other operators who made snap judgments about people's capabilities. Lieutenant Commander Chen, Lieutenant Commander Burke, Harrison made the introduction efficiently. I'll leave you two to discuss coordination procedures. Burke, Chen is here to analyze our current methods and identify potential improvements. After Harrison departed, Burke gestured for Sarah to sit across from him at the conference table. He had brought a thick folder with him, which he placed on the table but didn't open. Lieutenant Commander, I'll be direct with you. My team conducts sensitive operations that require precise coordination and absolute reliability from support elements. We can't afford coordination failures. I understand completely. My goal is to enhance coordination effectiveness, not to create additional complications. Burke studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. What's your operational background? Here it was, the question she had expected. Burke was assessing whether she had the credibility to understand what his team did and what they needed. Intelligence analysis and strategic planning, primarily focused on Pacific Theater operations. I've supported special operations missions, but not from the field perspective. No combat deployments? No direct combat experience, Sarah admitted. She could have mentioned her classified work or her security clearances, but Burke wouldn't be impressed by credentials that didn't involve personal risk. Burke nodded slowly, his assessment apparently confirmed. Then, let me explain how coordination works from my perspective. My team gets tasked with missions that are often planned with incomplete information and changing parameters. We depend on logistics, intelligence, communications, and medical support to be exactly where we need them, when we need them, with no exceptions. What happens when coordination fails? People die. Burke's response was immediate and blunt. My team, other units, sometimes civilians. There's no margin for error in what we do. This was exactly the kind of pressure Sarah had expected. Burke's perspective was entirely focused on mission success and team survival, which made perfect sense but could also create resistance to any changes that seemed to introduce uncertainty. Can you give me an example of a coordination problem you've encountered? Burke opened his folder and pulled out a map marked with various symbols and notations. 3 months ago, we had a mission requiring helicopter insertion at a specific time window. The logistics coordinator changed our bird assignment 2 hours before launch because of a maintenance issue. The replacement helicopter had different fuel capacity, which meant we had to modify our extraction plan in real time. Did the mission succeed? Yes, but only because my team adapted on the fly. We shouldn't have had to. Better coordination would have identified the maintenance issue earlier and arranged appropriate replacement assets. This was valuable information. Sarah could see how the incident illustrated both the resilience of Burke's team and the kind of coordination failure that her analysis was designed to prevent. What would have been the ideal handling of that situation? Earlier identification of the maintenance issue, immediate notification to all affected units, and prearranged backup assets that matched original specifications. Burke's response was crisp and specific. Instead, we got last-minute changes that forced tactical modifications. Sarah took notes as Burke continued describing several other incidents where coordination problems had created operational complications. His examples were clear and specific, painting a picture of highly capable units working around systemic inefficiencies rather than being supported by smooth coordination. From your perspective, what are the main coordination challenges? She asked. Burke leaned back in his chair, considering his response carefully. Information flow is inconsistent. Sometimes we get too much irrelevant data, sometimes we don't get critical updates. Resource scheduling is unpredictable. And there's insufficient understanding of our operational requirements among support personnel. What would better coordination look like? Real-time information sharing between all elements involved in an operation. Clear priority protocols that everyone understands and follows. Support personnel who understand special operations requirements. Burke paused. And fewer layers of bureaucracy between operational decisions and implementation. This last point was particularly interesting. Sarah suspected that Burke viewed her analysis as potentially adding another layer of bureaucracy rather than eliminating existing inefficiencies. My goal is actually to reduce bureaucratic friction, not increase it, she said. Inefficient procedures hurt everyone, but they're especially dangerous for operational units like yours. Burke's expression suggested he remained skeptical but was willing to listen. What kind of improvements are you considering? I haven't developed recommendations yet because I'm still analyzing current procedures. But, based on what you've told me, better information systems and clearer priority protocols would be logical areas to examine. Information systems are only as good as the people using them, Burke said. The real problem is that support personnel don't always understand operational urgency. When we say we need something by a specific time, we mean that exactly. Not 5 minutes later, not as soon as possible, but at that exact time. This was a cultural issue as much as a procedural one. Special operations units operated with a precision and urgency that was difficult for support personnel to appreciate unless they had direct experience with operational consequences. How do you think that understanding could be improved? Burke considered this question carefully. Exposure. Support personnel should observe actual operations to understand why precision matters. Cross-training so they understand our requirements from experience, not just from written procedures. That's an interesting approach. Have you suggested it before? Several times. The response is usually that support personnel don't have appropriate clearances or that operational security doesn't permit observers. Sarah recognized the classic bureaucratic response, valid security concerns used to avoid implementing potentially useful but administratively complicated solutions. What if observers could be cleared for specific training purposes? That would help, but it requires someone with authority to approve exceptions to standard security protocols. Burke's tone suggested he had little faith that such authority would be exercised. They spent another hour discussing specific coordination procedures, with Burke providing detailed examples of both successful coordination and frustrating failures. His perspective was invaluable for understanding how current systems worked from the operational end, but it also highlighted the gap between what special operations units needed and what support systems typically provided. As the meeting concluded, Burke gathered his materials and stood to leave. Lieutenant Commander, I appreciate that you're trying to improve things. But, I'll be honest with you, we've seen a lot of analysts come through here with good intentions and impressive credentials. Most of them produce reports that look good on paper but don't change anything in practice. What would convince you that analysis could lead to meaningful improvement? Burke paused at the door, considering her question. Results that we can see in actual operations. Less time wasted on coordination problems, more reliable support, fewer last-minute changes that force tactical modifications. He met her eyes directly. If you can deliver that, you'll have my full support. If not, we'll continue working around the system like we always have. After Burke departed, Sarah remained in the conference room to review her notes. His perspective was clear and consistent. Special operations units needed precision, reliability, and understanding from their support systems. Current coordination procedures were adequate for routine operations but failed under the pressure of complex, time-sensitive missions. The challenge would be developing improvements that enhanced precision without adding bureaucratic complexity. Special operations personnel were naturally suspicious of additional procedures, but they would embrace changes that demonstrably improved their operational effectiveness. Her next meeting was with Captain Jennifer Walsh from Marine Reconnaissance, scheduled for 1,300 hours. Sarah spent the interim reviewing intelligence reports about Marine recon operations and their coordination requirements, which were similar to SEAL operations but with some important differences in tactical doctrine and support needs. The base cafeteria was crowded when she stopped for lunch, providing an opportunity to observe the social dynamics among different units. She noticed that personnel tended to cluster by service and specialty, with SEALs, Marines, Air Force, and Navy support personnel maintaining somewhat separate groups. This was natural and probably inevitable, but it might also contribute to coordination problems by limiting informal communication between units. Captain Walsh arrived precisely on time for their afternoon meeting, her bearing reflecting the disciplined professionalism that characterized Marine officers. She was perhaps 35, with the kind of weathered confidence that spoke of extensive field experience. "Lieutenant Commander Chen, I understand you're analyzing our coordination procedures." "That's right, Captain. I'm trying to understand how current systems work and where improvements might be beneficial." Walsh settled into her chair and opened a notebook filled with handwritten notes. "I'll start by saying that coordination between our unit and base support has generally been good. We've had fewer problems than some other units, possibly because we're smaller and our requirements are more predictable." This was a different perspective than Burke had provided. Sarah was curious about why Marine Recon had experienced better coordination. "What do you think accounts for your better experience?" "We work closely with Chief Thompson in the Operations Center. He understands our mission profiles and anticipates our needs. When we're planning operations, he's involved early in the process so support requirements are identified before they become urgent." This suggested that coordination problems might be more about relationships and communication than about formal procedures. Units with good relationships to support personnel experienced fewer problems, while those with more distant relationships struggled with last-minute complications. "How did you develop that working relationship with Chief Thompson?" "Time and mutual respect. We've worked together for 2 years now. He knows our capabilities and limitations, and we know his." Walsh paused. "It also helps that our operations tend to be longer duration missions with more predictable support requirements. Can you give me an example of how that early involvement helps?" Walsh flipped through her notebook and found a specific entry. "Last month we had a reconnaissance mission that required insertion by submarine. Thompson was involved in planning from the beginning, so he could coordinate submarine schedules, weather windows, and communication protocols as an integrated package rather than trying to arrange separate elements at the last minute. What would have happened if he hadn't been involved early? Probably a lot of back and forth trying to match available submarine time with acceptable weather conditions. Maybe mission delays or compromises in operational parameters." This was exactly the kind of proactive coordination that Burke had said his team rarely received. Sarah was beginning to see a pattern. Units that had developed good working relationships with support personnel experienced smoother coordination, while those that maintained more formal, distant relationships struggled with systemic inefficiencies. "Are there coordination problems you do experience?" "Intelligence sharing can be challenging. Different units have different clearance levels and different need-to-know requirements. Sometimes we're operating in the same area as other units without being aware of potential conflicts until something happens." "What kind of conflicts?" "Overlapping patrol areas, competing claims on local assets, even potential friendly fire situations if units aren't aware of each other's presence." This was a more serious problem than the resource scheduling issues Burke had described. "Operational units working in proximity without adequate coordination could create genuine safety hazards. How is deconfliction currently handled?" Walsh's expression suggested this was a particular frustration. "Theoretically, the Operations Center tracks all unit activities and identifies potential conflicts. In practice, units sometimes receive tasking through different channels, so the Operations Center doesn't always have complete situational awareness." "Different channels?" "Higher headquarters, joint task force assignments, special access programs. Not everything goes through base coordination." Sarah was beginning to understand the complexity of the coordination challenge. Base operations centers could only coordinate what they knew about, but special operations units received tasking from multiple sources, some of which bypassed local coordination entirely. "What would improve deconfliction?" "Better information sharing between all the entities that task units. Real-time updates when mission parameters change. and clear protocols for units to communicate directly when they discover potential conflicts. This was a systemic problem that went beyond base-level coordination procedures. Improving deconfliction would require cooperation from higher headquarters and, possibly, changes to classification procedures that limited information sharing. They discussed several other coordination issues, with Walsh providing specific examples and practical suggestions for improvement. Her perspective was more system-focused than Burke's, perhaps reflecting the Marine Corps' emphasis on organizational effectiveness over individual unit autonomy. As their meeting concluded, Walsh offered a final observation. "Lieutenant Commander, the real challenge isn't identifying coordination problems. Most of us know exactly what the problems are. The challenge is implementing solutions that work across multiple units with different cultures, different clearances, and different chains of command. What would make implementation more likely to succeed? Buy-in from unit commanders. If people like Burke and myself believe the changes will genuinely improve our effectiveness, we'll make them work. If we think they're bureaucratic exercises, we'll find ways around them." This reinforced what Burke had told her earlier. Special operations personnel would embrace changes that demonstrably improved their capabilities, but they would resist anything that seemed like additional bureaucracy without clear operational benefit. Sarah spent the remainder of the afternoon reviewing her notes from both meetings and preparing for the next day's sessions with Air Force Special Operations and 2 classified units she couldn't discuss openly. The pattern emerging from her analysis was clear: coordination problems were primarily about relationships, information flow, and mutual understanding rather than formal procedures. The existing bureaucratic structure was adequate for routine operations but broke down under the pressure of complex, time-sensitive missions involving multiple units with different requirements. Successful coordination depended heavily on personal relationships between unit representatives and support personnel, which meant that effectiveness varied significantly based on who was involved rather than on systematic procedures. As evening approached, Sarah made her way to the officers' club for dinner, hoping to continue her informal observation of base social dynamics. The club was moderately busy, with small groups of officers relaxing after the day's duties. She selected a table where she could observe without intruding and ordered a simple meal. "Mind if I join you?" The voice belonged to Lieutenant Commander Patterson, who was approaching with a beer and a friendly expression. "Please," Sarah said, gesturing to the empty chair across from her. Patterson sat down and took a long drink from his beer. "How did your meetings go today?" Burke and Walsh represent 2 different approaches to coordination. Different but both valuable. Burke focuses on precision and reliability, while Walsh emphasized relationship building and early involvement. That's a good assessment. Burke's team operates at such a high tempo that they need everything to work exactly right the first time. Walsh's unit has more predictable requirements, so she can invest time in developing working relationships. Which approach is more typical? Patterson considered this question while finishing his beer. Most units fall somewhere between those 2 extremes. The challenge is that our coordination procedures are designed for the predictable operations, but the high-tempo units create the most stress on the system. This was an important insight. Sarah was beginning to understand that coordination challenges were fundamentally about managing different operational rhythms and requirements within a single support structure. Is there a way to accommodate both types of requirements? Maybe. But it would require more flexible procedures and probably more personnel in the operations center. Right now, Chief Thompson and his people do an amazing job, but they're stretched thin when multiple high-tempo operations are running simultaneously. As they continued their conversation, Sarah noticed Commander Harrison entering the club with several other officers. He glanced in their direction, his expression neutral but watchful. Patterson noticed the attention as well and shifted slightly in his chair. "Something I should know about?" Sarah asked quietly. Patterson followed her gaze toward Harrison's table. "Nothing specific. Harrison just likes to keep track of what's happening around here. He's protective of his people and suspicious of changes that might disrupt proven methods." Is my analysis seen as disruptive? Not yet, but it depends on what you recommend and how you present it. Patterson leaned forward slightly. Can I give you some advice? Harrison respects competence and directness. If you can demonstrate that you understand operational realities and that your recommendations will genuinely improve mission effectiveness, he'll support you. But if he thinks you're an outsider trying to impose theoretical solutions on practical problems, he'll resist. This was consistent with what Sarah had observed in her initial meetings. Harrison and his officers were competent professionals who took pride in their work. They would support changes that enhanced their effectiveness, but they would resist anything that seemed like criticism of their current methods or interference from someone who didn't understand their challenges. The key would be presenting her analysis in a way that acknowledged their expertise while identifying opportunities for systematic improvement. She needed to frame her recommendations as enhancements to already effective operations rather than corrections to deficient procedures. As the evening progressed, Sarah found herself in conversation with several other officers who stopped by their table. Each provided additional perspective on coordination challenges and potential solutions, confirming the patterns she had identified during her formal meetings. The picture emerging from her analysis was complex but manageable. Coordination problems were real but not catastrophic. Current procedures were adequate for most operations but failed under pressure from high-tempo units with complex requirements. Solutions existed, but implementing them would require careful attention to unit cultures and individual relationships. What none of her new colleagues knew was that her analysis would eventually reach Admiral Morrison and potentially influence coordination procedures throughout the Navy's Special Operations community. Her recommendations could affect thousands of personnel and hundreds of missions over the coming years. The responsibility was significant, but Sarah felt confident that she was developing an accurate understanding of both the problems and potential solutions. The challenge now would be developing recommendations that could be implemented successfully within the complex political and organizational environment she had observed. As she walked back to her quarters under the clear California sky, Sarah reflected on her progress. In just 2 days, she had gained valuable insights into coordination challenges and begun building relationships with key personnel. The real work was just beginning, but she felt prepared for the complex analysis that lay ahead. Tomorrow would bring meetings with Air Force Special Operations and additional sessions with support personnel. Each conversation would add to her understanding of the intricate web of relationships and procedures that made coordination either successful or problematic. The base was quieting down for the night, but Sarah knew that operations continued around the clock. Somewhere in the darkness, teams were preparing for missions, support personnel were monitoring communications, and the complex machinery of special operations was grinding forward with the precision and dedication that had impressed her since her arrival. Her job was to make that machinery work even better. The crisis began at 0347 hours on a Tuesday morning when Sarah's emergency pager buzzed with the urgent tone reserved for operational emergencies. She was instantly awake, her military training overriding the natural confusion of sudden awakening. The message was brief but alarming: immediate coordination emergency, report to OPS Center ASAP. Harrison. Sarah dressed quickly in her duty uniform and made the sprint across the darkened base to the operations center. Even at this early hour, the building was alive with activity, personnel moving with the controlled urgency that marked genuine crisis response. The operations center itself was a hub of intense activity, with multiple workstations active and Chief Thompson coordinating several conversations simultaneously. Commander Harrison spotted her arrival and immediately approached, his expression grim. "Chen, glad you're here. We have a situation developing that requires immediate coordination between 3 different units, and our normal procedures aren't working." "What kind of situation?" Sarah asked, her analytical mind already shifting into crisis mode. Harrison gestured toward the main display, which showed a map of the Pacific with several areas highlighted in red. "Intelligence indicates a hostage situation on a cargo vessel approximately 200 miles southwest of here. American nationals are involved, and the situation is deteriorating rapidly." Sarah studied the display, noting the complexity of the tactical picture. Multiple ships were converging on the area, aircraft were being repositioned, and various units were apparently preparing for different aspects of a potential rescue operation. "What's the coordination problem?" "We have SEAL Team 7 preparing for maritime assault, Marine Recon positioning for backup extraction, and Air Force Special Operations providing air support. 3 different chains of command, 3 different communication systems, and overlapping resource requirements." Harrison's frustration was evident. The operation is being coordinated from 3 different headquarters, and none of them have complete situational awareness. This was exactly the kind of multi-unit coordination challenge that Sarah had been brought to analyze, but it was happening in real time with American lives at stake. The academic exercise had suddenly become a life-or-death test of coordination effectiveness. "Where's the breakdown occurring?" Chief Thompson looked up from his console, his face reflecting the stress of managing multiple crisis communications. "Ma'am, we're getting conflicting priority assignments for helicopter support. Intelligence sharing is fragmented because of different clearance levels, and the units can't communicate directly because they're on different radio networks." Sarah moved to the central display to better understand the tactical situation. The complexity was immediately apparent. 3 elite units were preparing for coordinated action, but the coordination itself was failing under the pressure of multiple command structures and incompatible procedures. Who has overall command authority? That's part of the problem, Harrison replied. The operation crosses multiple jurisdictions, so command authority is unclear. Pacific Fleet has tactical control, but Joint Special Operations Command is providing assets, and the State Department is involved because of diplomatic implications. This was a nightmare scenario from a coordination perspective. Multiple agencies with different priorities and procedures were trying to coordinate a complex operation in real time without clear command relationships or compatible communication systems. What specific decisions need to be made right now? Thompson consulted his notes. Helicopter allocation for insertion and extraction, intelligence sharing protocols so units have current threat assessment, and communication procedures so the teams can coordinate during the operation. Sarah felt the weight of the moment. This was exactly the kind of situation where coordination failures could cost lives, and everyone in the operations center was looking to her for solutions. The irony was that she was supposed to be observing and analyzing coordination procedures, not managing an actual crisis. "Commander Harrison, what decision authority do I have in this situation?" Harrison met her eyes directly. "Rodriguez is en route but won't arrive for 20 minutes. I'm delegating tactical coordination authority to you until he gets here. Chief Thompson and his team will implement whatever procedures you direct." The responsibility was enormous, but Sarah had trained for exactly this kind of challenge. She moved to the central console and began assessing the available information, her mind automatically organizing the complex variables into manageable categories. "Chief Thompson, patch me through to the team leaders for all 3 units. I need direct communication with Burke, Walsh, and whoever is leading the Air Force element." "Yes, ma'am. Setting up conference call now." Within minutes, Sarah found herself in direct communication with the 3 unit leaders who would be executing the rescue operation. The conversation was tense, with each commander expressing frustration about coordination problems and conflicting orders. "Gentlemen, this is Lieutenant Commander Chen in the Coronado Operations Center. I understand you're dealing with coordination problems that could compromise mission success." Burke's voice came through clearly on the communication system. "Chen, we need helicopter insertion in 30 minutes, but we're being told the birds are allocated to Marine backup. We can't execute without transportation." Captain Walsh's response was immediate. "Our extraction plan depends on helicopter availability for backup. If the SEALs get primary allocation, we're left without emergency extraction capability." The Air Force element leader, whose voice Sarah didn't recognize, added his own concerns. "We're ready to provide air support, but we need target identification from ground units and clearance through restricted airspace. Right now we have neither." Sarah could see the problem clearly. Each unit had legitimate requirements, but the coordination system was failing to prioritize and deconflict their needs effectively. Without immediate resolution, the entire operation could collapse. "Understood. Here's how we're going to solve this." Sarah's voice carried the authority that came from clear analysis and decisive action. "Burke, you get primary helicopter allocation for insertion, but your extraction is contingent on mission success. Walsh, your team provides backup for extraction and handles perimeter security during the operation. Air Force maintains standby status until ground teams provide target verification." "What about backup extraction if the primary birds are damaged?" Burke asked. "Marine recon becomes your backup extraction. Walsh, position your team for immediate helicopter pickup if primary extraction fails." "That works from our perspective," Walsh confirmed. "We can reposition for emergency extraction support." Sarah continued coordinating the details, establishing communication protocols between units and arranging for real-time intelligence sharing. The key was creating simple, direct procedures that eliminated bureaucratic complexity while ensuring all units had the information they needed. For intelligence sharing, all units will receive real-time updates through this operations center. Chief Thompson will maintain continuous communication with all elements and relay critical information immediately. What about command authority during the operation? The Air Force leader asked. Burke has tactical command for the assault phase. Walsh has authority for extraction coordination. Air Force provides support under Burke's direction until extraction begins, then follows Walsh's guidance. Sarah paused. Any questions or concerns about these assignments? The responses were immediate and positive. Each unit understood their role and responsibilities, and the coordination procedures were simple enough to implement under operational stress. Excellent. Execute according to these parameters. Operations Center will maintain continuous coordination and provide real-time support. Good luck. As the communication ended, Sarah turned to find Harrison watching her with an expression of grudging respect. The Operations Center continued its controlled chaos, but now there was a clear sense of direction and purpose. Nice work, Harrison said simply. You cut through the bureaucratic complexity and gave them workable solutions. Chief Thompson looked up from his console with a grin. Ma'am, that's the clearest coordination briefing I've heard in 6 months. The units know exactly what they're supposed to do and how to work together. Sarah felt a surge of satisfaction, but the operation was far from complete. The next several hours would determine whether her coordination decisions would lead to mission success or tragic failure. Chief, maintain continuous communication with all elements. I want real-time updates on mission progress and immediate notification of any coordination problems. Yes, ma'am. All units are reporting ready status and clear understanding of operational parameters. The tension in the operations center was palpable as they monitored the developing operation. Multiple displays showed aircraft positions, ship movements, and communication traffic as the rescue unfolded in real time. Sarah found herself simultaneously monitoring the tactical situation and analyzing the coordination procedures that were making mission execution possible. 20 minutes into the operation, the first critical test arose. Burke's team reported that the cargo vessel's layout differed from intelligence estimates, requiring tactical modifications that could affect extraction timing. Operations Center, this is SEAL Team 7. We need 15 additional minutes for target clearance. Recommend delaying extraction timeline. Sarah immediately understood the implications. Delaying extraction would require repositioning Marine backup and coordinating with Air Force support to maintain air cover for an extended period. Burke understood. Walsh, can your team maintain extraction readiness for additional 15 minutes? Affirmative. We're positioned and ready to adjust timeline as needed. Air Force element, extend air cover for additional 15 minutes. Maintain current station. Roger that. We have sufficient fuel for extended coverage. The coordination adjustment was executed smoothly, with all units adapting to the tactical change without confusion or delay. Sarah realized that the simple, direct procedures she had established were working exactly as intended under operational pressure. 30 minutes later, Burke's team reported mission success. All hostages were secure and ready for extraction. The coordination challenge now shifted to getting everyone safely off the vessel and back to base. Operations Center, SEAL Team 7 reports successful hostage recovery. Requesting immediate extraction. Burke, confirmed. Walsh, execute extraction plan. Air Force, provide cover during extraction phase. The extraction proceeded flawlessly, with Marine Recon coordinating helicopter pickup and Air Force elements maintaining protective air cover. Within an hour of the initial assault, all personnel and hostages were safely airborne and en route to base. As the aircraft carrying the rescued hostages touched down at Coronado, the operations center erupted in subdued celebration. The mission had been a complete success, with no casualties and all objectives achieved. Commander Rodriguez arrived just as the operation concluded, having been briefed en route about the crisis and its resolution. He found Sarah coordinating the post-mission debrief with unit leaders while Chief Thompson managed the formal reporting requirements. Chen, I understand you managed coordination for the entire operation. How did it go? Mission success, sir. All hostages recovered safely, no casualties, objectives achieved. Sarah handed him a preliminary report she had prepared during the operation. Coordination procedures worked well once we simplified command relationships and established direct communication between units. Rodriguez reviewed the report quickly, his eyebrows rising as he read the details. You coordinated between 3 different units with different command structures and made it work in real time? The unit leaders deserve the credit, sir. They executed brilliantly once they had clear coordination procedures and direct communication. Harrison approached their conversation, his expression reflecting genuine respect. Rodriguez, Chen performed exceptionally under pressure. She cut through jurisdictional complexity and gave the units exactly what they needed to succeed. What made the coordination effective? Rodriguez asked. Sarah had been thinking about this question throughout the operation. Simple procedures, clear authority relationships, and direct communication. We eliminated bureaucratic layers and gave each unit leader the information and authority they needed to do their jobs. Any coordination failures? Minor timing adjustments when tactical conditions changed, but the units adapted smoothly. The key was establishing procedures that could flex with operational requirements. Chief Thompson joined their group, his satisfaction evident. Ma'am, I've been coordinating operations here for 8 years, and that was the smoothest multi-unit operation I've ever supported. Clear instructions, good communication, and everyone knew exactly what they were supposed to do. Over the next hour, Sarah participated in formal debriefing sessions with all 3 unit commanders. Each provided detailed feedback about what had worked well and what could be improved for future operations. Burke was particularly complimentary. Chen, that was exactly the kind of coordination support we need. Clear decisions, simple procedures, and real-time adaptation when conditions changed. You proved that effective coordination enhances our capabilities instead of constraining them. Captain Walsh echoed his assessment. The key was that you understood our requirements and gave us procedures that supported our mission instead of complicating it. That's what we need from coordination support. The Air Force element leader was equally positive. Outstanding coordination. We had clear roles, good communication, and immediate support when we needed timeline adjustments. That's how joint operations should work. As the debriefing concluded, Sarah realized that the crisis had provided an unexpected validation of her analytical conclusions. The coordination problems she had identified during her interviews were real and significant, but they could be solved with relatively simple procedural improvements. More importantly, she had proven to herself and to the base personnel that she understood their operational requirements and could provide effective leadership under pressure. The skepticism she had encountered from Harrison and others was replaced by genuine professional respect. Later that afternoon, word of the successful operation spread throughout the base. Sarah found herself receiving congratulations from personnel she barely knew, all acknowledging her role in coordinating the complex rescue mission. Lieutenant Martinez approached her during dinner at the officers' club. Sarah, everyone's talking about how you handled the coordination this morning. Burke is telling anyone who'll listen that you understand special operations better than most officers who've been doing this for years. The units deserve all the credit. They executed flawlessly once they had clear procedures. Maybe, but everyone knows that coordination was the key to mission success. You proved that effective analysis and leadership can make the difference between success and failure. Commander Patterson joined their conversation, his expression reflecting the general sentiment around the base. Chen, I have to admit I was skeptical when you first arrived. Another analyst with impressive credentials but no operational experience. But what you did this morning was exceptional leadership under pressure. Thank you. It was exactly the kind of situation I came here to understand better. Well, you certainly understand it now. And, more importantly, everyone here understands that you can deliver results when it matters. As the evening progressed, Sarah reflected on the day's events and their implications for her analysis. The crisis had provided a real-world test of coordination procedures and demonstrated both their weaknesses and potential for improvement. The breakdown had occurred exactly where her analysis had predicted, at the intersection of multiple command structures, incompatible communication systems, and unclear authority relationships. But the solution had been simpler than she had expected: direct communication, clear procedures, and unified coordination authority. More significantly, the crisis had established her credibility with the base personnel in a way that months of interviews and analysis never could have achieved. She had proven under operational pressure that she understood their requirements and could provide effective leadership when lives were at stake. Commander Harrison approached her table as the evening wound down, his expression reflecting a fundamental shift in his attitude toward her presence. "Chen, I owe you an apology. When you first arrived, I assumed you were another analyst who would study our procedures, write a report, and leave without understanding what we actually do here. I can understand that assumption, sir. My background probably didn't suggest someone who could handle operational coordination. Your background was exactly right, as it turned out. You brought analytical skills and strategic thinking to a tactical problem, and it made all the difference." Harrison paused. "I want you to know that you have my complete support for whatever recommendations you develop. You've proven you understand our mission and our challenges." This was a remarkable transformation from the skeptical commander she had met just days earlier. The crisis had demonstrated her competence in the most convincing way possible: successful leadership under pressure with American lives at stake. "Thank you, sir. I appreciate your support, and I'll do my best to develop recommendations that enhance mission effectiveness." "I'm confident you will. And, Chen, whatever authority you need to implement those recommendations, you'll have it. Today proved that effective coordination can mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure." As Sarah walked back to her quarters under the star-filled California sky, she realized that everything about her assignment had changed. She was no longer an outside analyst studying coordination procedures; she had become a proven leader whose recommendations would carry the weight of demonstrated competence. The crisis had also validated her analytical approach. Coordination problems were real and significant, but they could be solved with relatively straightforward procedural improvements. The key was understanding operational requirements and designing procedures that enhanced rather than constrained unit effectiveness. Her classified assessment mission had also taken on new dimensions. She now had first-hand experience with both coordination failures and successful solutions, providing concrete examples to support her eventual recommendations to Admiral Morrison. Most importantly, she had established relationships and credibility that would make implementation of her recommendations much more likely to succeed. Personnel who had initially viewed her with skepticism now saw her as someone who understood their challenges and could provide effective solutions. The real work of developing systematic improvements was still ahead, but Sarah felt confident that she now had both the analytical foundation and the political support necessary for successful implementation. The crisis had transformed her from an observer into a participant, and the difference would shape everything that followed. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities, but tonight she could reflect with satisfaction on a day that had proven the value of both analytical thinking and decisive leadership. The coordination procedures that had failed in the morning had been replaced by methods that worked under pressure, and the lessons learned would benefit future operations involving hundreds of personnel and countless missions. The base was settling into its nighttime routine, but Sarah knew that operations continued around the clock. Somewhere in the darkness, personnel were applying the coordination procedures she had developed, and their success or failure would validate or refute her approach to solving complex organizational challenges. The responsibility was significant, but, for the first time since arriving at Coronado, Sarah felt fully confident in her ability to meet it. 3 weeks after the rescue operation, Sarah had become an integral part of Coronado's operational rhythm. Her office in Building 7 had transformed from a temporary workspace into a coordination hub where unit leaders regularly sought her input on complex missions. The initial skepticism had been replaced by professional respect, but Sarah was about to discover that her growing influence had created unexpected complications. The morning began routinely enough with Sarah reviewing overnight intelligence reports and preparing for her weekly briefing with Commander Rodriguez. Her analysis of coordination procedures had progressed significantly, and she was ready to present preliminary recommendations for systematic improvements. What she didn't expect was the knock on her office door at 0730 hours from Chief Petty Officer Thompson, whose expression suggested something beyond routine coordination issues. "Ma'am, I need to speak with you about a sensitive matter. Could we discuss it privately?" Sarah gestured for him to close the door and take a seat. Thompson was one of the most professional non-commissioned officers she had encountered, and his request for privacy was unusual. "What's the situation, Chief?" Thompson leaned forward, his voice dropping to a confidential tone. "Ma'am, there's been some discussion among senior personnel about your role here and your background. Some questions have been raised about your clearances and your actual authority to coordinate operations." Sarah felt a chill of apprehension. Her classified mission required her to maintain the cover story of being a routine strategic analyst, but her successful coordination of the rescue operation had apparently raised questions about her true capabilities and authority. What kind of questions? Commander Harrison mentioned to some of the other officers that your performance during the rescue operation was unusually sophisticated for someone with your stated background. He's wondering if there's more to your assignment here than has been officially disclosed. This was exactly the kind of scrutiny that could compromise her classified assessment mission. Sarah had been so focused on proving her competence that she might have inadvertently revealed capabilities that didn't match her cover story. I'm not sure I understand the concern, Chief. My background is exactly what's in my official file. Thompson studied her expression carefully. Ma'am, with respect, officers don't usually develop the kind of operational coordination skills you demonstrated without extensive experience in similar situations. Your performance was too smooth, too confident for someone who was supposedly learning our procedures. Sarah realized she was facing a classic intelligence dilemma. Her success in performing her actual mission was threatening to expose the very mission she was supposed to be protecting. She needed to address Thompson's concerns without revealing her classified assignment. Chief, I appreciate your confidence in my abilities, but I think you might be overestimating my experience. The rescue coordination worked because I applied systematic analysis to a complex problem, not because of any special background. Thompson's expression suggested he remained unconvinced. Maybe so, ma'am. But I thought you should know that there's been discussion about requesting a more detailed background investigation to verify your clearances and authority. The implications were serious. A detailed investigation could potentially expose her classified mission and compromise her assessment of base operations. She needed to manage this situation carefully while continuing her actual work. Who's driving this investigation request? It's not official yet, ma'am. But Commander Harrison and some of the other senior officers have been discussing whether to request clarification from higher headquarters about your actual role here. Sarah thanked Thompson for the warning and assured him that she would address any official questions about her background through appropriate channels. After he left, she immediately began considering her options. Her classified mission was too important to compromise, but she also couldn't allow suspicion to undermine her ability to complete her assessment. The solution came to her during her morning coffee. Instead of trying to deflect scrutiny, she would use it as an opportunity to gather additional information about base leadership dynamics. The way senior officers handled their concerns about her background would provide valuable insights into their decision-making processes and communication patterns. Her weekly briefing with Commander Rodriguez was scheduled for 1,000 hours, providing an opportunity to address the situation proactively. She arrived at his office with her usual coordination reports and a carefully prepared approach to the background questions. Good morning, sir. I have updates on coordination improvements and some additional matters to discuss. Rodriguez gestured for her to sit and opened his notebook. Excellent. Your recommendations have been generating positive feedback from unit commanders. Burke specifically mentioned that communication procedures have improved significantly since your arrival. Thank you, sir. The units have been very cooperative in implementing procedural improvements. Sarah paused, choosing her words carefully. I understand there may be some questions about my background and authority to coordinate operations. Rodriguez's expression shifted to one of mild surprise. Questions? What kind of questions? Chief Thompson mentioned that some senior officers have concerns about my clearances and whether my background adequately explains my coordination capabilities. Ah. Rodriguez leaned back in his chair, his expression becoming more thoughtful. Harrison did mention something along those lines. He's impressed with your performance but curious about how you developed such sophisticated coordination skills. I can understand the curiosity. Would it be helpful if I arranged for higher headquarters to provide additional clarification about my assignment and qualifications? Rodriguez considered this suggestion carefully. That might be useful, both to address any concerns and to ensure we're utilizing your capabilities appropriately. Can you arrange that through your normal channels? Yes, sir. I'll contact my assignment officer at Navy Personnel Command and request clarification of my role and qualifications for this position. This was actually an excellent development. By requesting official clarification, Sarah would be able to have her cover story reinforced by higher authority while maintaining her access to base operations. Admiral Morrison's staff would undoubtedly provide whatever documentation was necessary to support her mission. Good. That should resolve any questions and allow us to move forward with implementing your recommendations. Rodriguez opened his folder. Now, what improvements are you proposing? Sarah spent the next hour briefing Rodriguez on her systematic analysis of coordination procedures and her recommendations for improvements. Her proposals focused on three main areas: enhanced communication protocols between units, clearer authority relationships for multi-unit operations, and improved resource allocation procedures to prevent conflicts. These recommendations are based on extensive interviews with unit commanders and observation of actual operations, she explained. The goal is to maintain the flexibility that makes our current system effective while eliminating the inefficiencies that create problems under pressure. Rodriguez reviewed her detailed proposals with obvious approval. These look excellent. Practical improvements that address real problems without adding bureaucratic complexity. How do you propose we implement them? Gradual implementation with extensive input from unit commanders. Start with communication protocols, which are the easiest to modify, then move to authority relationships and resource allocation. Each change should be tested during training exercises before being implemented for actual operations. Timeline for full implementation? 6 months for basic improvements, 12 months for complete integration. But we should see positive results from the communication protocols within the first month. Rodriguez made notes as they discussed implementation details. Sarah was pleased to see that he understood both the value of her recommendations and the importance of careful implementation that maintained unit buy-in. As their meeting concluded, Rodriguez addressed the background question one final time. Chen, I want you to know that regardless of what additional clarification we receive about your background, your work here has been exceptional. You've proven yourself through performance, which is what matters in military service. Thank you, sir. I appreciate your support and confidence. Sarah left Rodriguez's office feeling confident about her ability to manage the background scrutiny while continuing her mission. The official clarification would resolve questions about her authority while her systematic recommendations would provide concrete improvements to base operations. However, her afternoon brought an unexpected complication. Lieutenant Martinez approached her during lunch with information that suggested the background questions were more complex than she had initially understood. Sarah, I wanted to give you a heads up about something I overheard. Commander Harrison was talking to some of the other senior officers about requesting a formal investigation into your background. What kind of investigation? Martinez glanced around to ensure they weren't being overheard. He's concerned that your coordination abilities suggest intelligence or special operations background that isn't reflected in your official file. He's wondering if you might be here in some kind of assessment capacity. This was remarkably close to the truth, and Sarah realized that Harrison's suspicions posed a more serious threat to her mission than she had initially recognized. His military experience had led him to exactly the right conclusions about her unusual capabilities. That's an interesting theory. What makes him think that? Your performance during the rescue operation was too polished, too confident for someone who was supposedly learning our procedures. And your analytical approach to coordination problems suggests training and experience beyond what's in your file. Sarah found herself in the uncomfortable position of being impressed by Harrison's analytical skills while needing to deflect his conclusions. His assessment was entirely accurate, which made it particularly dangerous to her classified mission. I can see how my performance might seem inconsistent with my stated experience. But sometimes analytical training and systematic thinking can compensate for limited operational background. Martinez looked skeptical. Maybe. But Harrison is convinced there's more to your assignment here than routine strategic analysis. He's planning to request a formal review of your clearances and authority. This forced Sarah to accelerate her timeline for requesting official clarification. She needed Admiral Morrison's staff to provide documentation that would satisfy Harrison's concerns without compromising her actual mission. Thanks for the warning, Jessica. I'll make sure to address any questions through appropriate official channels. The remainder of the afternoon was spent preparing a carefully worded request to Admiral Morrison's staff for enhanced cover documentation. She needed materials that would explain her coordination capabilities while maintaining her assessment mission security. Her encrypted communication to Norfolk was succinct: request enhanced cover documentation. Local leadership questioning background consistency with demonstrated capabilities. Mission security requires official clarification of qualifications and authority. The response came back within 4 hours, demonstrating the priority Admiral Morrison placed on her mission. The message was equally brief: enhanced documentation being prepared. Expect official clarification within 48 hours. Continue mission as planned. While waiting for the documentation to arrive, Sarah decided to address Harrison's concerns directly. She requested a meeting with him to discuss coordination improvements and use the opportunity to gauge his specific suspicions about her background. Harrison's office reflected his years of experience, with photographs from various deployments and commendations that spoke of distinguished service. He greeted her professionally but with the kind of attention that suggested he was evaluating every aspect of her demeanor. "Chun, good to see you. Rodriguez tells me you've developed comprehensive recommendations for coordination improvements." "Yes, sir. I'd like to discuss them with you and get your input before we move to implementation." Sarah spent 20 minutes briefing Harrison on her analysis and recommendations, watching his reactions carefully. His questions were incisive and demonstrated deep understanding of both operational requirements and organizational dynamics. "These are solid recommendations," Harrison acknowledged. "Practical improvements that address real problems. Your analysis demonstrates thorough understanding of special operations coordination challenges." "Thank you, sir. I've learned a great deal from observing operations here." Harrison leaned back in his chair, his expression becoming more direct. "Chen, I'm going to be frank with you. Your performance since arriving here has been exceptional, but it's also been inconsistent with your stated background and experience." Here was the direct confrontation Sarah had been expecting. She met Harrison's gaze steadily, maintaining the professional composure that had served her throughout her career. "I'm not sure I understand the inconsistency, sir. Officers don't develop the kind of operational coordination skills you demonstrated during the rescue operation without extensive experience in similar situations. Your analytical approach to complex problems suggests training and background beyond what's reflected in your official file."